and inner life is the only real life. And outer life is an unreal life. And inner life is a life with attention directed inwards. Without completely and finally knowing what inward means. But when I tell you to turn direction, to turn attention inwards, then something understands, and maybe a turnaround of the attention takes place. So that then, the discovery can begin. What is inward, what is inside. The inner path is simply put a path to find what is real, to wake up from a life which is unreal, but seems real. You mean to avoid the term guru? Well, what guru? It would be simple to give a direct answer to this question, but I have to give you this question back. What guru? You see, the guru is an inexistent figure. If we put it in human forms, it's an inexisting principle in the Western society or in the collective mind of Western society. So guru does not exist, you see. So before we put energy in answering this question, we have to ask much more questions about what is a guru, and also answer the question, why is the guru so, has the guru vanished in Western society? Jesus Christ was the last living guru in Christianity. I mean, the last one accepted and realized by the later Catholic Church. Since then, our religious culture was in many ways representing hostility against the form of a living guru. So we don't know what the living guru is. What is left is the false guru, the charlatan, and the media is full of comments on false teachers, especially false spiritual teachers and false gurus. So the guru is simply inexistent. In 2,000 years of Christianity, we haven't given a bit on about the guru, So it's an unknown principle. It's an unknown sphere. Nobody knows anything about gurus. So some people have gone to the Eastern world and have visited spiritual masters in the Eastern world, and these few people, they have maybe got a taste about what the Guru principle is. But for Westerners who have never had any contact with Eastern religions, it's very hard to, first to learn about the Guru, because they have a very neurotic conditioning about authority in general, and of course especially about authority which is higher than the mind. Well, I'm this one principle. The teaching is the realization of the eternal true nature of man. By world abandonment, and the becoming perfection of existing perfection by world communion. So this is the answer I gave in my last book. This is the inner path. And if the inner path is very short, it's a no path. Death is a gate to eternity. Finding eternity means finding the true nature of man, as I said before. So we have to pass through this gate. Of course, a normal human being only knows about death as death of the physical body. The death of the physical body, according to the inner teachings, is not the most important transition. And it's not the most important transformation that a human being can go through. There is a much more important moment of death, which is the death of the mind. Which is not the same as death of intelligence, but it's the death of this self-identified entity called mind, which is a me, separate from the you, or from the world, or from God. So the inner path, we can get very near to death, the moment of death, not in the physical sense, but in a mental and then even in a spiritual sense. So death is a moment that guides you into your true self. We need knowledge about death to find true self. This is not knowledge accumulated by the mind, it's knowledge by the direct experience of death, you see. Death we fear, the I fears death and tries to escape. The inner teachings would teach you the opposite, meaning turning around and getting very close to death wherever it appears, to look into the eyes of what is death. So yes, it's a teacher, it's the guru principle that appears through death. Well, inside is always what is immanent to the soul. Outside is what is alien to the soul. So, of course, everybody has a very rough distinction between inside and outside, and might believe that what is underneath the skin is inside, or might believe that what is in the mind is inside. This is not necessarily inside, but it's the path of self-exploration which makes you discover, what is inside, and finally exclude many objects that seemed to be inside before, like, for example, thoughts or emotions. And then you discover, on this path to inside, you discover that, well, this seemed to be inside, but it's finally not inside. You see, inside can only be what is yourself, emanating from yourself. Inner life starts with your attempting direction of the attention inwards. So you start to discover, you start to explore, who am I? And of course you find yourself exploring into the labyrinths of mind. They might turn out to be not I, not inside, but you continue to go deeper with the intention to find what is truly I. No, inner life doesn't start with being human. It leads you to being human. I mean, you are human, this is clear, but the realized adulthood of a human being is not the same as just simply being human, mostly in an unconscious way. People need what I call the second incarnation, and only the inner path can lead a person to the so-called second incarnation. in which you have to go through, but this time in a conscious way, once again go through the steps of evolution. This is a process that happens once more. It's a repetition of this first incarnation with attention turned inwards. And it's also a description of the integral path where you where the consciousness goes through every step of incarnation, integrating, the lower one and transcending it. And this is the natural becoming, natural maturing of consciousness. There is no way of avoiding maturity and adulthood if we don't interfere. It's just happening. It's the natural play of evolution. And of course, you often hear me say that adulthood, or the mature humanity, is a condition for the inner path and for spirituality in general, because the spiritual path is not for children, and most people, the great majority of people, has not overcome childishness in this life. Why is it? Because they haven't gone over a certain threshold, which is called responsibility. Responsibility is a response. It's a response. We could call it a response to fate. It's as far as the contribution of the personal mind can go. So it's the end of the contribution of the personal mind. After this, we don't know what happens to this mind, but definitely the mind has to walk over this threshold and take responsibility. You see, people have responsibility anyway, but who is taking it completely? This implies that you completely and totally accept that the only source of suffering in yourself, even in the whole world, is only in your mind. So then the discovery has to start. What is the mind? Who is the mind? No, inner life is not in itself an impersonal life yet, but it can lead to an impersonal life. The impersonal life is the dissolution of the personal life. If we discover the nature of mind, if we discover the true nature of mind, it means that personal life dissolves. Impersonal life, you see, does not seem attractive to the beginner of this path, and to a person that has absolutely no idea about reality. An impersonal life seems to be the end of individuality and maybe even creativity and specialness of myself. And it's true, of course. It's true, but it's also untrue. People don't understand. The mind cannot understand impersonality completely, or impersonal life. we discover what is personal, and we find two aspects. We find, of course, the great identification with physical form, with name and form. This makes me personal. And then what makes me personal, what is even of more, what has more power even than the physical identification, is the identification with the I mind. The I mind is a story of life. It's a story in time. You know, it's related to certain conditions, to a certain limited frame of perspective. If you leave this perspective, if it's possible for consciousness to leave this limited frame, this conditioning, then yes, an impersonal life could show, which changes everything, of course. You know, impersonal life changes everything. It's not even finally essential whether this one personal body is living or not. It doesn't change impersonal life. And so-called opinions or standpoints of this mental identification called mind, they're also not really important. You know, it doesn't matter whether this mind has an opinion or not. It doesn't change in personal life. And whether this body is there or not also doesn't change in personal life. Impersonal life is complete. If the vessel is broken, and everything is flowing out and spreading all over, you know, this widening of consciousness that gives the perspective of an impersonal life. Well, the human being is included in impersonal life. The human being is not excluded from personal life, from impersonal life. You see, the smaller, the more limited, is always included in the greater and the less limited. So there is no contradiction between the form of the human being and an impersonal life. The physical form, which you relate intimately, of course, with what you call a human being, the physical form does not say, me, I am, you know, and then the story follows. This is not the physical form that tells the story. The physical form is just an object of life, like there are many objects. They're all part of the great play called manifestation. It's only the mind, the I mind, that is, yes, resisting impersonal life. Impersonal life is just also a way to point to reality, you know? It's a way of, it's just a different name for reality. Whereas personal life is just another name for dream or unreality. Yes. The mind is an entity resisting impersonal life because the mind says, I want to be somebody. I don't want to just be like water. Water is everywhere in every body and every single object in life. Everything is just water. I want to be. I want to be a certain kind of water. I want to be, a drop that has a certain form, a certain name, and a certain story that gives a separate kind of power. Impersonal life is just the description of unity. This unity is found anyway in the stillness of mind. In the inner life we find love. In the outer life we confuse objects with love. We might love a person, we might love a thing, we might love a country, we might love our home, but these are all objects of perception and not love itself. Finding love itself, we can only go an inner path, so that the attention is not what leaves this obsession for objects. So yes, on the inner path we find love. Well, I would introduce this book as an introduction to the wisdom teaching, to a universal inner wisdom that is transmitted not only in certain cultures and not only in certain times. It's also called eternal philosophy. And this, if you are seriously interested in following this inner path that leads to reality, then we have to introduce certain notions to clarify all the misunderstandings that have made it impossible to people to really understand what is meant by. So there is a chapter about the mind. Who is the mind? This is the most fundamental question on the inner path. And there's another chapter about what is suffering. You see, suffering, what the inner teachings understand by suffering is absolutely not the same what ordinary people understand. If you are a healthy person and you laugh a lot and you have happy time, it doesn't mean that you're not suffering. It can also mean that you're simply not even aware of suffering. Suffering is this image, somebody is living in a prison. It's a small and limited space, and maybe there are some plastic flowers on your night table. You know nothing else. It's what you have lived all your life, or maybe for lifetimes. There is nothing else you know. You see, you are not even aware of the limitation of yourself. So you find yourself happy inside the prison. So suffering needs an awakening, first of all, to what is suffering, that you are suffering. And then, of course, there is a chapter about the teacher-student relationship that accompanies the inner path, if it is serious. And also, all these misunderstandings. I have been talking to you about the loss of the guru principle in the Western world before. Yes, there will be a second part of this book, but it will still need time.